at a solid foundation, radical changes, and all those things that kind of go along with that. But as we have a radical change in our life, sometimes we come to a point in our life that we have a burning bush experience. You guys know what I'm talking about? It's kind of like Moses. We're going to be looking in the book of Exodus today. But Moses had a burning bush experience. But before we could really get into that, let's kind of give you a background history on where we're at. Moses was born during a time period that the Pharaoh of Egypt desired to have all the male babies that were Israelites thrown into the Nile River. Wow, what a good deal that is. If you're a male child, we're going to throw you into the Nile River. And he was doing that to honor his small lowercase g gods. And so Moses is born during this time period that's going on. Well, let's take a look at the Nile River. The Nile River, first of all, is not necessarily a good place that you'd want to put a baby. It's filled with alligators, or actually crocodiles. And in doing a research, I found that the Nile crocodiles could go up to 20 feet in length. That's a big old crocodile. So the crocodiles are in there. And then I found out that you have poisonous snakes and poisonous spiders in the Nile River. And in the midst of what we're looking at, we find that this is going on. And you go back to Exodus chapter 1 and verse 22. It says, "Then Pharaoh gave this order to all the people. Throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River, but let the girls live." Wow. And then in chapter 2, we come into the point, if you were to go through chapter 2, you find that you have this lady. And her name is Jochebed. And in doing that, she has a baby. And so she raises the baby for 3 months, and she could no longer hide this wonderful little baby. So she decided to follow the letter of the law that Pharaoh had instituted. So she takes her baby, and she takes this baby, 3 months old, and she puts it in a wicker basket type thing, and puts pitch and tar on the inside of that. And then she says, "I'm going to put my baby in the Nile River because that is what has been commanded of me." Wait a minute, there's some twist on that. There's a loophole in what the letter of the law said. So she takes her baby and puts it in the Nile River with the crocodiles, the poisonous snakes, and the poisonous spiders. And she has 2 other children. She has Miriam, who's probably about 7. And she has a son by the name of Aaron. And Aaron is 3 years older than this baby that is born. And I'll show you guys that later on. But Miriam is about 7 from everything that I can find out. So imagine having your 7-year-old daughter go watch the baby go down the river in a basket to make sure that it's not being ate by a crocodile. How many of you guys think it's pretty exciting? I wouldn't want to put my 7-year-old granddaughter in charge of a baby going down the Nile River with crocodiles or alligators or anything else, poisonous snakes or anything such as that. But Miriam does what her mom says. And wouldn't you know it, that Pharaoh's daughter is down there and she's bathing. And in doing some research, some people actually believe that Pharaoh's daughter had a rash or a form of leprosy that she could not get rid of. And she was in the Nile River bathing and her attendants were there. So here you have this princess that in chapter 2 is down bathing. And she's doing all these things. Miriam sees the princess. And I think Miriam might have taken the basket and maybe pushed it a little bit towards the princess. But in doing this, as you read the scriptures, it says that Pharaoh's daughter saw the basket and called for her attendants to go get the basket. Now we have to realize that Moses was a miracle baby to begin with. And in doing that, if this is true on the other research that I've done, and I can't find anything in the Bible to back it up other than reading other commentaries and other places in history, but if she had a rash or this form of leprosy, when she saw the wicker basket and she heard the baby crying, as soon as she touched the basket, it says that her leprosy left her. And if that is true, and like I say, I can't find that anywhere in scriptures, but it's reading other things that have, you do that kind of stuff. And if that is true, imagine how special she would have felt towards that child. And it's kind of like those puppies that appeared on my door, thanks Linda, you said God delivered them, but after Easter, these puppies just found themselves on my porch. And now they're 5 months old. And they were so adorable that I just couldn't let them go. But imagine Pharaoh's daughter seeing the basket come by and hearing the baby cry. And what's your first response when you see most babies? Oh, aren't they cute? And we want to go through and we want to entertain, and we want to be entertained by that cute little baby. Kathy, you're lucky enough to have some youngins, some babies. 2 of them, huh? And every time you see them, don't you say, oh, aren't they just wonderful? And you feel so special to hold a newborn baby, or to hold a baby that is 3 or 4 or 5 months old. And guys, we like to hold them, and then whenever they start to smell right, we like to hand them off to somebody else. Because we don't like the rightness that is going on. But imagine as you take a look at this and you say, Dave, how do you come up with these things? Because you read the scriptures, and that's what it says, that Pharaoh's daughter and her attendants were down there, and they saw the wicker basket, and they heard the baby cry. And Pharaoh's daughter gave word to go get the basket. And imagine that. Now here, let's go back to Moses' sister Miriam. And Miriam is there. And all of a sudden, she finds out that Pharaoh's daughter picks up the baby and starts comforting it, saying, oh, look at this baby. Look how wonderful this baby is. Look at the joy that it's bringing to me in my life. And Miriam says, hey, would you like me to go get one of the Hebrew women who's had a baby and be the nanny for this child? He said, Dave, how do you get that? Because let's take a look at it. In chapter 2 and verse 5, it says, then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds, and sent her female slaves to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. Yes, go, she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said, take this baby, nurse him for me, and I will pay you. Ah, wait a minute. I take this baby and nurse this child until the point that it's weaned. Now, I don't know how long that it could take, but 6 months to what, 2 years, to depending upon the culture and everything else, to nurse a baby, somewhere in there. My babies were all bottle fed, so I don't know. But 6 months to 2 years, is that about right? So imagine if all of a sudden Moses' mom was taking care of this baby for 2 years. Alma, your baby's not even 2 years old, is it? How old is Faith?
10 months.
10 months. So imagine giving up your child, but being the nanny for that child for 10 months, 11 months, 12 months, whatever that time period is. Do you think there's a bond that's going to be built between Moses and his real mom? Do you think that he's going to forget that as the mom's holding him and nursing him and paying attention to him and bringing all those things into his life? So you have this going on. And you say, Dave, where do you get the names of it? Because here it doesn't mention it. Well, if you go to Exodus chapter 6 and verse 20, it will tell you Jochebed is the mother of Moses. And it will also tell you that she had a son by the name of Aaron. If you don't believe that, you can go to Exodus 15 and 20, and it would tell you the same thing. Exodus 26 and 59 gives you a list of Moses' family, and it mentions Miriam, Aaron, and Moses to be the children. So now all of a sudden, you have this man by the name of Moses. And in doing that, he is now going to be educated in the greatest schools of the time. You know, today we might say Yale, Harvard. As long as they're outside of California, you might have a good college. That's not really true. But Point Loma, one of the finest colleges, one of the finest universities. And everything that is going into Moses, he's being filled with that. And you say, Dave, how do you know that? I'm glad you asked. Because in Acts chapter 7, verses 20 through 29, it says, at that time Moses was born, and he was no ordinary child. So now I take that and I tie it back into what I was saying. If he was no ordinary child, and it says for 3 months he was cared for by his family. When he was placed outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him in as her own son. Moses was educated in the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. Wow. And all of a sudden we come into the end of chapter 2. And we're going to get into the meat and the root of our story. And in chapter 2, towards the end, Moses somehow realizes that he is a child of God. How that happened, I do not know. Could God have spoken to him and said, Moses, you are a Hebrew, you are an Israelite. Moses, you need to take care of what's going on in your life. Perhaps Moses, knew Miriam, his older sister, 7 years older than what he is. Perhaps he knew the relationship. Perhaps he knew Aaron. I don't know how God ended up speaking to him and saying, Moses, you are a Hebrew. But as you continue to read in chapter 2, it says, and Moses all of a sudden saw an Israelite or a Hebrew being mistreated and killed the Egyptian. Wow. And see, that is in chapter 2. And we'll pick it up with verse 13. The next day he went out and saw 2 Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew? And in verse 14, the man said, who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me like you killed the Egyptian? And at this point, you have to realize that Moses is 40 years of age. He's been educated. He's done all these things. So what does he do? He takes off and he goes out on the back 40 for a total of 40 years. And in that time period that he's gone, on the backside of the desert, he ends up finding his wife and had children. So at 40 years, we go through this and we take a look at it. And all of a sudden, he's hiding Any of you have ever hid from the things that you've done? I remember when I used to do things that were wrong. My parents would say, David, did you do this? Man, my brothers and I, we would take off and we would hide. Even though we knew we were going to get caught, we would take off and we would hide. And see, we go back to Acts chapter 7. And we pick it up with verse 23. When Moses was 40 years old. You say, Dave, how do you come up with these numbers? Because it corresponds with these other things. He decided to visit his own people, the Israelites. He saw one of them being mistreated by an Egyptian. So he went to his defense and avenged him by killing him. Moses thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them, but he was not. And then in verse 26 of Acts 7, it says, the next day Moses came upon two Israelites who were fighting. He tried to reconcile them by saying, men, you are brothers. Why do you want to hurt each other? But the man who was mistreating the other pushed Moses aside and said, who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you did the Egyptian yesterday? When Moses heard this, he fled to Midian, where he settled as a foreigner and had 2 sons. See, so you have to realize that Moses was fearful for his life. And he hightails it out, and he goes in hiding for 40 years. Any of you guys ever hid out for 40 years? I was lucky if I could hide out for 2 or 3 minutes with my mom and dad because my parents knew where I was. And he hid out for 40 years because of the things that was going on in his life. When we do what's wrong, we try to hide, not only from our parents and those that we wrong, we try to hide from God. And we come into Exodus 3. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he had led the flock that far on the other side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And there the angel of the Lord appeared to him with flames within a bush. So Moses all of a sudden is out on the back 40 as he's hiding from God. You have to remember that he tried to come in 40 years before that and rescue the Israelites by killing one of the Egyptians, saying, hey, I can do this in my own strength. I should be able to do this because I, after all, am a Hebrew and I have the authority of the Egyptians. So I should be able to go through and rescue who it is that's going on. And as he's out there on the back 40, and as he's minding his own business, watching his father-in-law's sheep. Now, I don't know how you do the math, but 40 and 40, where I come up with is 80. Right, Kathy? Last time I said something like that, I was wrong in my math. But 40 plus 40 is 80, right? So at 80 years of age, all of a sudden he turns around and he sees this bush that's burning. I don't know about you, but I'm the type of person that if I see a fire and I see the fire trucks, I want to follow the fire truck because I want to see where the action is. And so all of a sudden he turns around and he notices this bush, and he says in King James, behold, the bush burneth, and it's not being consumed. I don't know about you, but if I saw something that was on fire, that was not dwindling down, I'd want to go investigate it. And so he turns around and he sees this bush, and as the bush is burning, all of a sudden from within inside of the bush, he hears, Moses, take off your shoes, for you are on holy ground. Man, when the bush starts talking to you, you better listen. When the donkey starts to talk to you, you better listen. So God says, take off your shoes. You're standing on holy ground. Well, Dave, why did he say Because Moses was raised as an Egyptian and he did not know how to approach the throne of God. He did not know how to do that. So God says, Moses, take off your shoes. You're standing on holy ground. I don't know about you, but if I heard the bush speaking to me and I looked in and I saw it was on fire, not being consumed, I would fall on my face before God and say, God, forgive me. God, I recognize your holiness. God, what are you trying to say to me in my life? And Moses sits there and he looks at the bush that's burning. And as he takes a look at that, and it says Moses saw through the bush that was on fire, but it was not being burnt up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see the bush. And when the Lord saw that he had gone over, God called to him and said, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here am I. And in verse 5 it says, do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Did you know that wherever you and I meet God is considered holy ground? It could be that burning bush. It could be an altar in the home. It could be driving down the road. But when God speaks to you and I, it should become a place that we recognize as holy. And say, God, you dealt with me here at this point in my life. God, I recognize that this is you speaking to me, and I'm going to treat this as holy ground. How many of you guys recognize that? That we can treat something as holy when we see the manifestation of God in our life. Take off your shoes, you are standing on holy ground. Now let's go back to Acts chapter 7. Because I want to show you that my math is actually correct. Acts chapter 7, verses 30 through 32. After 40 years had passed, 40 years, he was, when he killed the Egyptian, 40 years had passed, that's 80 years. An angel appeared to Moses in the flames of the burning bush that was burning in the desert of Mount Sinai. When he saw this, he was amazed at the sight. As he went over to get a close look, he heard the Lord say, I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses. And it says, Moses trembled with fear and did not dare look at it. Wow. To be intrigued by something when God is moving in our life. As God is moving in our life, we can be intrigued today and say, God, I recognize that it's your presence. God, I recognize that it's your authority upon my life. And God, whatever you need me to do, God, I'm willing to do. And we take a look at it. And in verse 11, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Reading between the lines, going back 40 years. In my mind, this is how the conversation goes with Moses and God. God, last time I tried to, deliver Israel, I killed an Egyptian. Now they're trying to kill me. God, you want me to go back and you want me to go where? Yeah, God, I think you might be crazy. And see, that's how the conversation's going in my mind with Moses and God. You guys put your own imagination to it and imagine how you would respond to God if you tried to do something 40 years before and they were searching for you. Well, God, I don't know about that, God. And he goes on. And in verse 12, and then God said, I will be with you, and this will be a sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God upon this mountain. And in verse 13, see, here's where my mind goes, and as I take a look at that, Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of the fathers has sent me, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what am I to tell them? God, what if I go before the Israelites and they don't want to listen to me? I tried doing that 40 years ago, and God, they really didn't have a favorable response to me. God, they were like, are you going to judge us? Are you going to kill us like you did the Egyptians? What's your trip there, brother? God, are you sure that you're really calling me? And God says, tell them that the I Am has called you to do this. The Elohim, Jehovah Jireh, Yahweh. And see, the Israelites were so afraid to use the name of God that they would fall short of pronouncing the whole name of Jehovah. And God says, tell them the I Am, the creator of the universe, has called you to go and deliver the people. I am. And in verse 15, and God said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name that you shall be called. Go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, appeared to me, and I have watched over you, and I have seen this, what is done in Egypt. Wow. I have seen this, what is done in Egypt. Let's, for just a moment, let's kind of imagine that what he's really saying is, I've seen the literal hell that the Israelites are in for the last several hundred years. Any of you guys had experiences like that? You've gone through things in your life, and it says, man, I don't know how I can cope with what it's going through. I don't know how I'm going to be able to withstand the things that are coming into my life, emotionally, physically, mentally, financially. God, I just can't take it anymore. I got good news. Deliverance is on the way, and his name is Jesus Christ. But see, we have to have that burning bush experience in our life, where we come to that place in our life where we can recognize that God is speaking to us. And in verse 17 of chapter 3, and I have promised to bring you out of your misery in Egypt, into the land of Canaan, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hittites, and all those other ones with the ites in them. And in verse 18, the elders of Israel will listen to you. Then you and the elders will go to the king of Egypt. Wow. Then you and the will go and be able to share the gospel message. But see, sometimes we cannot go because we're afraid of the things that are facing us, because of the circumstances that we're in. Kind of like what Kathy was talking about in Sunday school. We have to trust God, and in that trust we have to have a peace in our lives. Say, God, I know that you're there and you're going to provide the answers for me. And if you read down to the end of the verse in 20 or 23, whatever it is, the last verse of chapter 3, it says, I want you to go and I want you to borrow gold and silver from your neighbors. In other words, he's saying, I want you to tell the people to go and get their back wages because they had not been paid. I want you to go and gather the back wages that is due to you and your nation. Not so much borrow in the sense that we think of today. Not to steal, but I want you to go and get the provisions that you're going to need for this journey in your life. And here he begins to argue with God. But see, redemption is on the way. We could go to Ephesians chapter 2, verses 4 through 10. And it says, because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ. Even when we were dead in our transgressions, it is by grace that you have been saved. And God raised us up with Christ and seated us in the heavenly realms. And in verse 7 of Ephesians chapter 2, it says, in order that the coming age he might show incomparable riches of his grace expressed in kindness to us in Christ Jesus. For it is by grace that you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, but the gift of God. And see, there's times that you and I can feel unworthy in our life. We can feel like Moses, standing before God, saying, God, they're not going to listen to me. I'm a nobody. I'm a nothing. God, I've done all these things in my life. But God, they're not going to listen to me, and we feel unworthy, even though God has called us and told us to be holy. And we can feel unworthy, such as Moses was doing. But he says, I am that has called you. The Elohim, the Yahweh, Jehovah. And what does he do? He commissions Moses to go out and do his job for him. But see, God's timing is always perfect. We'd be on the back 40, minding our own business. But when God gets a hold of us, we better listen. Some people on Facebook, of course, the earthquakes, the 6.4, the 7.1. Somebody wrote, Dave, do you think that maybe God's trying to get the attention of the people to turn to Him? God is always trying to get our attention, whether it's a burning bush or whatever it is. God is concerned about you and I. But see, what happens is a lot of times we become like Moses. We're afraid to go out and do the job that God has called us to do. Next week, we're going to be looking at Moses and his argument with God. Yeah, Moses argued with God after having a burning bush experience. See, you and I can do the same thing. I shouldn't say you, I should say me. Sometimes God has called us to do things. He's called me to do things, and at times I'm fearful because of the response that I might get. Sometimes I can allow the fear to come in, and I don't listen to God, and I want to argue with God. Next week, you guys are really going to want to be here so that you can find out how Moses argues with God. If you want to cheat, you can read chapter 4. But Moses begins to argue with God, even though he's had a burning bush experience. He's no different than you or I. Sometimes you and I want to argue with God, regardless of the experience that we've had with God in the past. If you would stand with me today. Father, I thank you, Lord, for the redemption that you do give us. Lord, it's through your Son, Jesus Christ. And Lord, there's times in our life that we can have a burning bush experience. On the back 40, minding our own business. And God, you speak to us, and you tell us that the place that we are in is holy. And God, all we want to do is argue with you. And we feel so unworthy. But yet you've given us your word, your promise that you would always be with us. And that you are the I am, the Alpha, the Omega. Lord, you are the Elohim, the Jehovah, Yahweh. God, you are God of all gods. And you are the creator of the universe. But Lord, I ask that as we have our burning bush experiences, God, that you would help us to be able to share those experiences with those that we come in contact with. Lord, I ask that you just watch over us until we meet again. In your Son's name.